Alright, another draft physics presentation. Video presentation. Uh, Let's be accurate. So anyway, comments first, and then we'll play around with some mocking of the whole history of Aether. Anyway, that's it, dude. Clear it. Wise monkey. I just hate this dude thing. He knows it, just keeps doing it. So let's pretend he didn't say dude. So that's it. Clear it. So even that's just too jargony. That's too, what's the word for that? Ghetto. Come on, you're English. Use English, to its maximum capacity to say something beautifully and completely. Not this crap, whatever that meant. So I don't know what you say. Jargon. That's all it is. Jargon. Anyway. Beeswolt says, is found to be 10 to the 40th time stronger than gravity. That's, I should be able to come up with some, this fast kind of reaction to that just to explain the difference. But the difference is sort of obvious. I mean, the size of the force doesn't change. And then they change the size of the object they're comparing to the force, sort of as one way of looking at it. But the other way is to understand that gravity just affects atoms, more specifically electrons and protons. So it's a force that affects big things, but it only affects them by affecting their nuclear bits, the little tiny things inside of them. So, in a sense, that equalizes that comparison argument by saying, well, let's just negate the force effect because it's affecting the nuclear bits. But then it has to be understood that the thing causing gravity, right, the gravity you fall into versus the gravity you make. So obviously, if I was to take an electron and put it in space and then have the giant sun, and I'm going to measure the force, well, the force is being created by the giant sun. The force isn't being created by the little electron. The little electron isn't really moving the sun any appreciable amount that anybody could ever detect with any detector. So clearly, the relevant part of the equation is the hugeness of the sun in terms of its relationship to the electron. And that's a preposterous comparison to make. That's a 10 to the 40th power difference in size. Sun, electron. So you can see it right in front of your face how that's a dopey comparison. Anyway. Just for starters, magnetism is extremely varied depending on the circumstances. Yes, depending on how big the magnet is, how dense the magnetism is in the material. But we're really talking about the interaction between electron and electron, so it's not very varied. The gravity force is distributed throughout the matter it interacts with, and it is in a state of equilibrium. I don't even think that's relevant. The real relevant factor is there's a whole bunch of empty space in the big sun. That's the real difference. A bunch of empty space versus the electron. No empty space to account for. But with imbalances in some of the converging forces causing acceleration. Again, it's this argument that you're focusing the thing is sensitive to. So it's like you could have a big giant sun full of kryptonite, but it's all spread out in the sun, so it really doesn't bother Superman. But if you take all the kryptonite and shoot it in a beam, then it bothers Superman. It kills him. Okay, so you could make a radioactivity argument or something like that. If you concentrate the force that affects something, obviously the effect can be a very high multiple. It can be magnified. Alright, with magnetism, you're segregating two types of force bits. If the plus bits are approaching the proton, then the reflections increase and they repel. And that's a very powerful mechanism because the repulsion, the reflection, means it's a perpetual source of energy. As long as that little force bit remains caught between two things, it will proportionally increase the amount of pressure based on proximity. If the minus bits are approaching the electron in the same, it's the same. If the plus and minus are approaching opposite, one of there will be a relative deficit of reflections causing the two to accelerate towards each other, causing acceleration in the direction of the lower pressure. That's all you really need to say, I suppose. But anyway, it's like you've taken away balance in the gravity in a sense, but it's dependent on the composition, dipole, arrangements of the material. The material must have the two elements, and the two elements must be in an arrangement that the force can see for there to be an effect. Yes, magnets must be aligned the right way for magnetism to have any effect. Okay, you can change the pressure to a degree depending on volume in the system to boost the filtering effect and increase the magnetism. Yes, the more atoms that are lined up, the more magnetic the material becomes, but again, this comparison is more to the forces between electrons and protons and electrons, and that force is pure in a sense. And that's why there's this huge difference of 10 to the 40th, because the force is pure between electrons and protons and protons and electrons. Like coiling wire around iron and using more voltage. Well, that's a whole nother subject. Alright, anyway, so this Wikipedia article on ether theories. So I just wish people would annotate their links. So they should say something like, I think this page is quite useful in understanding how great ether theories are. Or say something like, you want to go to this page because it's a pretty good laugh. I mean, everybody's just talking out of their ass. I mean, it makes all the scientists look like idiots because they all say shit that sounds pretty idiotic. Alright, QED, quod edem demonstratum again. That which had to be demonstrated. Well, I like that definition better than the others of the Latin crap or whatever it is. You know, you have to demonstrate some things for people to understand. So I like that one. Alright, so off to the ether page. In context, I have been attempting to formulate some sort of written diagram of theory. I'm just having so much trouble writing lately just because I've run into this problem that it's so difficult to communicate with people that you can't say anything without it being misinterpreted. Just about anything. And so it's inhibiting me in the process because I look at every sentence and say, nope, that has to be redone. It's not good enough, not good enough. And you can't write that way because you don't get anything written. And there's so much context to how deep you look at any one piece of this thing at any one time. I mean, you can say something like shadows for gravity. It creates a shadow. But technically that's not what it's doing. I mean, it is, but it isn't. The gravity you fall into isn't the gravity you're making. So the shadow that's getting cast on you really doesn't have anything to do with you moving, blah, 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 blah. So, it does, the truth is you can make analogies, but they're just not good enough in many cases. And they're good enough, though, if you're understanding the principle what's happening and that you understand that details can be a little more complicated. So where am I going with that? Yeah, so you can just use metaphors, but it's sort of like talking about how our own brain works, or sometimes you have to use analogies, but you can't really describe the mechanical system. So you just use words like fear or some other thing to describe an emotion that isn't really what you think it is. It's a little more complicated, like anti-hunger or something. Fear is not fear. Fear is anti-hunger, or something bizarre like that is the real truth. But anyway, I'm not proposing that as a theory. I'm just using it as an example. So again, I'm checking my words. But anyway, so the real simple argument is that I think it's perfectly rational if you want to just say it in a couple of words, that if you want to understand the universe, there's two things in the universe: force and matter. The matter doesn't move until it's forced to move. Okay, the force has all the motion, and it's perpetual motion. That is, it's all in the form of little photon-y things moving the speed of light. and they never stop moving, and so all you can do is trap them. So that's all you got. You got stuff, force, moving the speed of light, and it's either free, going in a straight line, or it's caught in some system that's forcing it to do something sort of circular. Circular can be back and forth, very thin circle. And it's trapped. It's not getting where it was going. And not getting where it's going means that there's some other place in the universe that has an absence of force. There was force supposed to be there, and it's not there. And therefore that thing moves into the low pressure. And so everything is pushed, and it's only pushed because you can trap force, you can distract it, you can slow it down, prevent it from getting where it's going when it's supposed to get there by keeping it in some sort of, cul-de-sac where it's wasting time, essentially, just consuming it. Okay, that's the basic function of the universe. So there's just little bits going the speed of light, the speed of force, and then there's these bigger bits that absorb the force, that is, occupy it, keep it from going where it was going at the speed of light. Now it's going much slower. So when the force hits an electron, the electron absorbs the force. The electron moves a lot slower than the speed of light in that direction, and so the force isn't getting where it was supposed to go. And it's that simple. And not getting where you're supposed to go can be understood as low pressure, and there you go. And then if you release that pressure in some new direction, right, you absorb the guy going this way and you release the guy going that way, well, it means somebody else is going to get hit with extra pressure. So you can understand it's just about pressure. And the force creates the pressure, and the matter does what the pressure tells it to. It really is not empty space telling matter how to move. It's pressure telling matter where to go. There. That's the simple version. And the rest of it's just explaining how those things interact, how that actually takes place. Because there's two kinds of force and two kinds of matter. Proton, electron, positive force, negative force, north force, south force. There. Done. All right. And that, compared to this jargon I'm going to read to you now, this mush. In physics, ether theory is known as ether theories propose the existence of a medium, a space-filling substance or field. See, now they're changing it to a field, through thought to be necessary as a transmission medium for the propagation of electromagnetic or gravitational forces. So again, this is where it gets all into contradiction. So I don't know how much of this I'm going to be able to read, so blah, 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 blah. But I mean, it's ironic, because in one place they argue that the ether gets denser. They use the word rarefied, like Ken Wheeler, which just means there's less of. Okay, and they say there's more ether in the empty space. So Newton proposed an ether that at some point. See, the other thing, they're just quote mining people. So they might have said something, and then 10 years later they said, "No, I was full of shit when I said that." Just like I would do. I mean, the stuff I said 10 years ago was plainly, some of it was just wrong. Somebody quotes that crap. Yeah, oh yeah, well, it's an accurate quote. Yeah, it's an accurate quote that I already retracted, so fuck that. But that's what goes on here, so you don't know what the real story was. But you can't deny the fact that they said this crap, which makes you understand how they really didn't know what was going on, because they were just kind of trying to make it up as they went along. Alright, but anyway, so this whole idea, you can have two different... See, I thought of ether, when people proposed one, it was my understanding that the ether got thicker in the matter, because that's what made light go slower, because it's a propagation medium. So there must be more ether in the matter, because that's what's slowing the light down. There's a concentration of ether. And then the ether speeds back up because it gets back into space, where the little ether balls are further apart, and now it can move a lot more distance faster. Each block is bigger, where there's less ether. But they're saying it's the other way around. They're saying there's more ether in the empty space, and somehow the thick ether is pushing the planets together, because the ether is thick. And inside the planet, the sun, the ether is really thin. There's very little ether, which would mean the light would go faster. So, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. All right. Since development of special relativity, ether theories using a substance, ether, fell out of use in modern physics. this idea of using something is just kind of also a bullshit term, right? Because we know that it's not about its usefulness, it's about whether it's accurate or not. I mean, is this a true description of reality? So they just decided to say, well, let's just not say ether. But obviously bent space, they make the joke. I mean, the space tells the matter where to go. Well, how's it do that unless it's something? So it has to be a something. I mean, Einstein even admits that. You can't really do this relativity theory crap without conceding there has to be an ether. And are now joined by more abstract models. Like, you can get even more abstract than you already are. What, double dark matter? What? Right? Double dark matter cubed? Anyway, this early modern ether has little in common with the ether of classical elements. Well, why don't you just make that distinction then? Because what's the difference? Little in common, same word, little in common, from which the name was borrowed. And borrowed for what purpose? The associated theories embody various conceptions of this medium and substance. Well, that just makes, why don't you just say everybody's just talking all kinds of shit on the subject? Because that's exactly the truth of it. It's just all kinds of shit. Okay, pilot wave. So this is de Broglie bullshit. So de Broglie, again, is the idiot, the asshole, the jackass, the fucktard. They have his picture here. He does look like kind of a fucktard. Oh, where'd he go? Oh, here he is. Yes, he looks fucktarded. Sorry, but I mean, it's just this idea that an electron, because it has a velocity, we're going to give it a wavelength. I mean, isn't that just so frickin' cheating? You know it doesn't have a frequency. It doesn't have a wavelength. It doesn't have any of that crap. So why did they impose it on something that's just moving? It's a car moving 70 miles an hour down the road. You don't say, oh, its frequency is and its wavelength is. That's just bullshit. Mathematical bullshit. They decide to associate frequency with velocity, and now they use them as interchangeable terms, and it's just plain cheating. Alright, anyway. Any particle ever isolated has to be imagined as a continuous energetic contact. Why does it have to do that? Okay, that sounds like rope theory then. With a hidden medium. So, no, it doesn't. So, just there's absolutely no reason to do all this crap. Again, there's such a difference between understanding something as a frequency, bullets, and understanding a wave in water. And the two things aren't alike. They don't need to be understood as the same thing. They just don't. There's no reason to make distinctions, and there's every appearance, as Feynman would say, that quanta of light are clumps, okay, that they're not waves. All right, according to the philosophical point of view of Einstein, Dirac, Bell, Polyakov, Hoot, Laughlin, de Broglie, Maxwell, Newton, and other theorists, so really just going to make a mockery of all of them. There might be a medium, there might be chewing gum, there might be anything, with physical properties filling empty space. And now we're going to call space something else because we're saying it's filling the space, so therefore space doesn't exist, which is just nonsense. An ether, enabling the observed physical process. And there's just no reason to make one. Everything can be explained without it. The irony is they're going to turn Lesage's theory into an ether theory. So he has an ether theory made of ultra-mundane particles moving at the speed of light, essentially. I mean, they didn't know there was a speed of light, but that was the whole point, is the particles had momentum. So it wasn't some dead ether. It was an ether full of particles that carried momentum. I mean, a huge difference, right? It's not a propagating medium. Lesage gravity didn't say light travels through the medium. Okay, they didn't use it to explain the propagation of light at all. They used it to explain the momentum that forces two objects together and the exchange of the momentum. So these are just such nasty ways of defining something. I mean, if you're going to have an ether, then it should be a dead ether. It should be a medium. A dead medium transmits light accurately. A moving medium isn't going to do that. So clearly Lesage can't qualify as an ether. Alright, the velocity of a wave is proportional to the square root of the elastic forces which cause, this is Einstein, its propagation, and inversely proportional to the mass of the ether moved by these forces. So this was back in 1895, well, 10 years before his first paper. So, still in high school or something. Anyway, so again, this connection of velocity to frequency, which aren't the same thing, and there's not much else to say. Einstein, 1920, so 25 years later. We may say that according to the general theory of relativity, yes, the theory where he played all kinds of games to create this equality principle that all velocities are the same, space is endowed with the physical qualities in a sense, therefore there exists an ether. So yes, he's clearly stating, look, I'm clearly saying something's bent. You can't bend nothing, so there must be an ether that's bent. According to general theory of relativity, space without ether is unthinkable. These are Einstein's words. This is still his quote. Unthinkable. And people like Ken Wheeler complain that Einstein's not an etherist. He's an atomist. Well, he's pretty clearly not an atomist here. For in such space there not only would be no propagation of light, so again, he doesn't understand light as a corpuscle moving through empty space at the speed of light, but also no possibility of existence of standards of space and time. That's right, time and space are both absolutely nothing. Time is not a thing, it's a function. It isn't a thing, it isn't a place, it isn't a object, it isn't any of that crap. It's not a dimension. Space is nothing. It's not a dimension. There's 3 dimensions. It's no space dimension. Measuring rods and clocks, nor therefore any space-time intervals in the physical sense. Yes, of course, the whole stupid idiotic notion that you can divide space into hunks of time is just plain stupid. But this ether may not be thought of as endowed with the quality characteristic of ponderable media, as consisting of parts which may be tracked through time. So again, he's taking away the whole idea of giving it any physical structure at all. So it's not particles, dominoes, it's not some sort of medium like water where the molecules are compressed. No compression of molecules. The idea of motion may not be applied to it, which makes, again, no sense. I mean, obviously you're saying it's causing the motion, yet motion can't be applied to it. Come on. It pushes, but it has no pusher. Whatever. Paul Dirac, another... Forget about it. It's nutty shit. Physical knowledge has advanced much since 1905, notably by the arrival of quantum mechanics, and the situation about the scientific plausibility of an ether has again changed. So somehow they are bringing it back. If one examines the question of the light of present-day knowledge, one finds that the ether is no longer ruled out by relativity. So clearly it wasn't ruled out even in Einstein's own words. So that's kind of funny. I mean, it was basically ruled in. It's inconceivable, he says. Unthinkable is what he says. A world without it is unthinkable. I mean, this is they can't even describe each other's position accurately. Okay, and good reasons can now be advanced for postulating an ether. No, they can't. ... I wonder what the ... dots were. We have now the velocity of all points of space-time. So again, there's not velocity in all points in space-time, beyond the fact that you can acknowledge that every electron has a disposition, and that in the confinement of its disposition, you could say that if I open it up, like just if you open me up, you'll find a heart and a liver and a kidney. You'll find stuff that's organs, but in total, the organs add up to me total. So, and if we're just going to measure my motion, you could argue pieces of me are moving this way and pieces of me are moving some other way. There's always this equal and opposite reaction, even inside the closed system that I am. So for this to go up, something else there has to be pressure, released in the other direction. Something has to lever against something else. So the net movement of the whole thing is nothing. But if any one point in the space, you could say, well, he's going down. No, he's not, because there's another piece going up. So you have to think of the objects that are occupying space, matter bits. You can't think of them as points of space. Okay, you have to think of them as the fact that, yes, they're one continuous body and they behave the same rules in the sense that they have a net balance, and the net balance is going to be dictated by the internal circumstances. Anyway, no longer ruled out, blah, blah, blah. We now have the velocity of all points of space-time playing a fundamental part in electrodynamics. So that just means field theory in the sense that, look, we're just going to understand. We're going to try to pixelate the picture. So we're seeing a picture and we're saying we're just going to turn it into pixels, little dots on a screen. And we're going to say, what is that little dot doing? What is that little dot doing? What is that little dot doing? And obviously you could theorize that all the little dots are doing something. But as I'm just arguing, what you have to understand, though, is the something they're doing isn't in isolation. They're systems. And those systems all have to have conservation of energy. And in the end, you're going to find the balance. So you just keep zooming out, and eventually you'll find the equalization. You'll find as much stuff going this way as you will that way, if you keep zooming out. Just depends on how many layers of system something is in. How complex, what's the word they use in equilibrium? In thermodynamics. It's just about the isolation. So an isolated system, a closed system, will have, okay, a net thermodynamic equilibrium. All right. It's natural to regard it as the velocity of some real physical thing. Okay, so he's saying the real physical thing. I would argue, too, that it would be sensible to think of it as a real physical thing. But the physical thing is the force. And the force pushes systems. Matter. This, with the new theory of electrodynamics, vacuum filled with virtual particles, so just on its face is silly. Yes, vacuum is filled with force. Force pushes matter. But there's nothing virtual about it. And there's nothing creative about it. The system isn't creating more energy. We are rather forced to have an ether. So these are all reasons to say, look how these people are just grasping for a reality, and how thin the arguments defending are. They're just so thin. Not like, oh, I have piles of evidence and reason to believe. No. Very little evidence, and trying to make assertive statements about what must be believed reasonably, what must be our starting points. John Bell, 1986, and that's where this all goes wrong, right, is starting points. If you believe in bent space, you believe this, it's just going to confuse you because it's the wrong answer. So that wrong assumption, that wrong axiom is just going to get in your way, but you're going to keep trying to make it work. You give electrons frequencies they don't have, I'm telling you, it's going to catch up with you. Just like any lie, it's going to cause trouble. I have to sneeze. Let's see if we can pause before the event. Alright, I'm back. It wasn't very refreshing. A lot of weather, dramatic changes in weather lately. It's annoying. Anyway, John Bell in 1986, interviewed by Paul Davis, the ghost of the atom, has suggested that the ether theory might help resolve the EPR paradox by, that's Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, allowing a reference frame in which signals go faster than light. So again, just silly. Just no evidence to believe anything goes faster than light. It's just wrong, stupid, idiotic. Why are they doing this crap? He suggests Lorentz contraction is perfectly coherent, not inconsistent with relativity, and could produce an ether theory perfectly consistent with the Michelson-Morley experiment. So again, it could, maybe it does, it possibly, maybe. What do you mean? Either it does or it doesn't. And you either have evidence that it does or it doesn't. But they're just saying, oh yeah, I could explain everything if somebody bothered to write it down as a theory, but I'm not going to do that. I don't know. Bell suggests the ether was wrongly rejected on purely philosophical grounds. What is observable does not exist. What is unobservable does not exist. Well, that's not the statement. That's not the philosophical statement being made. The statement being made is if there's no evidence of its existence, there's no reason to believe it exists. Yeah, you just don't make up angels and ghosts and Sasquatches and UFOs and all this kind of bullshit. You wait till the evidence demonstrates some reason to believe they exist. Einstein found the non-ether theory simpler and more elegant. So here we go again, where we say, clearly Einstein, for the first 40 years of his life, was pretty content saying, oh yeah, it's an ether, it's just not that kind of, it's not God ether, it's, new modern ether, So they can't paraphrase each other correctly, but Bell suggests that it doesn't rule it out. So again, they can't rule it in, they can't rule it out, they can't do anything with it because it doesn't work. As I just pointed out, they end up doing stupid things with it. Well, no, the ether's thinner where the matter is. Well, now you have to explain why the light slows down. Anyway, besides the arguments based on his interpretation of quantum mechanics, Bell also suggests resurrecting the ether because it is a useful pedological device. Pad is a good word. Peda. Yeah, it's petty. Pedophilia. It's just it's a device, and again, devices should be avoided in playing this "what's the truth" thing. There aren't devices. There either is or isn't. This is many problems are solved more easily by imagining the existence of the ether. Yes, and then it ends up solving one problem and creating a new problem. So again, if you're going to use the ether to propagate light, then obviously the ether can't get thinner in the matter because then the light would go faster. Okay. All right. Einstein remarked, God does not play dice with the universe. So I guess this is still quoting Bell. Seems an insanely long quote. And those agreeing with him are looking for a classical deterministic ether theory that would imply quantum mechanical predictions as a statistical approximation, a hidden variable theory. Clearly a variable theory. A theory that says, yes, it happens because there's a thing varying, okay, that's causing the varying effect. So it's a variable theory versus a wacky woo theory that it just happens by magic. So you either have something that causes it or you have nothing that causes it. So you either believe in cause and effect, hidden variables, or you believe in wooey magic. Alright, in particular, Gerald T. Hoyle conjectured that we should not forget that quantum mechanics does not really describe what kind of dynamical phenomenon are actually going on. It's exactly, you gave frequency to things that have velocities. They don't have periods. They don't have a frequency. They don't have a wavelength. And yet you gave them one. So that's a pretty bad starting point, but rather gives us probabilistic results. Yes, probabilistic is what the outcomes are. And we're trying to figure out the cause of the probability. And you're pretending there is no cause. And I'm certainly going to argue that, yeah, there is. There's a variable. There's a variable. How close you are to the side of the slit, for example, is a variable. And the closer the photon goes to the side of the slit, the more likely it is to be bent. And I bet you could prove it. So go aim some photons, and I bet you that's the result you'll find. To me, it seems extremely plausible that any reasonable theory of the dynamics of the Planck scale would lead to processes that are so complicated to describe that one should expect apparently stochastic fluctuations in any approximation theory describing the effects of all of this as at much larger scale. So saying somehow that, the more lottery, the more numbers you're picking from for a lottery or something, the more tickets in the bowl, the more you have to work to find the probabilities. It's really easy when there's only two things and there's a 50-50 chance. There's only blue things and red things, and you pick them out, then you can figure out what the probability is. Really easy. Alright, this seems quite reasonable. First to try a classical deterministic theory for the Planck domain. Yes, it's all determinism. Every piece of evidence indicates determinism. So why are they even playing with some other theory of reality? One might speculate then that these people are embarrassing physics, in my opinion. This is just religious talk. One might speculate then that what we call quantum mechanics today may be nothing else than an ingenious technique to handle this dynamic statistically. I don't even think it's ingenious. What's the technique? You observe the effect and then you write a formula that describes, basically it's just a probability formula and tells you what the outcome is going to be. Now I don't see anything terribly ingenious in that, okay? So there's no technique in quantum mechanics. Again, the formulas are written for the variable circumstance, so the same formula doesn't apply to every circumstance. Like the reflective index of glass based on its thickness doesn't have the same formula as the wave equation for the two slit. The two slit and the one slit are using a different measurement in the formula. A different thing is actually a variable. I mean, this is not some sort of one glove fits all bullshit. In their paper, blah 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 blah, have attempted to substitute the recent proposal of G, a hoot in which quantum theory is viewed as not a complete field theory. It's not any kind of field theory, but it is in fact an emergent phenomenon arising from the deeper level of dynamics. So I don't even know, is that almost a concession? But how deep do the dynamics need to be? Again, all you're saying is that, look, there's a phenomenon, light bends. And you're saying, well, it's kind of, looks like it could be described as it bends more the closer the photon goes to the surface. It's just that we can't see where the photon went through the slit. We can't tell whether it went through the middle or it went through near the edge. But you could certainly speculate that what's happening when you're making the slit smaller? Well, the odds of your photon going near the surface go up. And coincidentally, right? Just coincidentally, the pattern spreads more. Oh, okay, so you could put that together and say, do I need any real complex thing here? Or do I just concede that the hidden variable is that the photons are traveling through a field of electrons and they're being influenced by that? I'm just saying all of this complex talk to describe simple phenomena. We're just talking about something's path being diverted. That's what all this is about. The probability of a path diversion. And they're saying the path diversion has something to do with the photon itself. It's some mystery property in the photon, when clearly the property is in the thing interacting with the photon. All right, the underlying dynamics are taken to be classical mechanics with singular Lagrangians supplied with the appropriate information loss condition. I mean, all this crap just to describe your light bends in different amounts, with plausible assumptions about the actual nature of constraint dynamics. Quantum theory is shown to emerge when the classical Dirac-Bohram algorithm for constrained dynamics is applied to the classical path interval. Well, that's very helpful. Sorry, no help. I can't give you any straight talk with any of that crap, man. This means one of their formulas works better, if you put some Elmer's glue factor in. If a hidden sub-quantum medium is assumed, glue, okay, wet glue, knowledge of its nature would seem desirable. Oh yeah, well, that's true. If there's glue, you want to know how sticky it is. It certainly is of quite complex character. I suppose, it seems to me, it only does sticky. It could not serve as a universal reference medium, as it would be contrary to relativity theory. So again, they're back to the same old argument that somehow you can't propagate the light if it's a moving medium. So if the medium has any motion in it, then it can't propagate light. It's kind of obvious. It would, the light would drift all over the place. In 1982, Lon Lovitz-Păcuiu, a Romanian physicist. So who is this guy? Why should we know who he is? Linguist, emeritus professor at the University of Bucharest, faculty of physics, and member of the Romanian Academy. Is best known for his work on gas discharges. So why does this guy wrote that the ether is a form of existence of matter, So this is where it really gets nutty. I mean, clearly it's a force. It can't be matter. Can't be. That's really detectable. Trust me, matter's really detectable. But it differs qualitative from the common atomic molecular. So again, it might as well just be a made-up dark matter again. So it has all the properties of matter except it's invisible. It's invisible man. Isn't that legitimate physics, invisible man? Alright, substance or radiation. You might as well just create homunculuses in our head doing all our thinking for us. There's a little man who's pulling all the levers for us. The fluid ether is governed by the principle of inertia. So again, it has velocity, but somehow it propagates light without distortion. And its presence produces a modification of the space-time geometry. Whatever. Alright, built upon Lesage ultramundane corpuscles, so this is hilarious. Pascal's theory posits a finite universe filled with some particles of extremely small mass traveling chaotically at the speed of light. Yes, then they can't propagate light. They're actually made of the same stuff light is made out of. They clearly aren't going to propagate light. The problem is you'd have to explain why they don't get in the way of the light, but obviously that can be explained by the simple fact that no forces ever interact with any other force. Force does not interact with force. And material bodies made up of such particles called etherons. So I don't know what the complete theory is, but clearly it starts with a silly premise, in my opinion. You can't have it both ways. Ether can't propagate light and be light. Can't do both things. Be as strong as light. The ether is gravity, essentially, by Newton's ether model. It's doing the pushing based on its density. None in the matter, rarefied in the matter. Alright, Sid Deutsch, a professor of electrical engineering and bioengineering, conjectures that a spherical spinning ether particle must exist in order to carry the electromagnetic waves. Well, again, there's no electromagnetic waves. There is force that goes from one place to another. And it doesn't need to wave itself there. And derives its diameter and mass using the density of dark matter. So again, this is where can that possibly go but nowhere? The invention of a fake other medium. So we have ether plus dark matter. I mean, does that make any sense? You have a material ether and then you have an immaterial dark ether. Alright. A degenerate Fermi fluid model, properly named degenerate, I'm sure, composed primarily of electrons and positrons, that has a consequence of the speed of light decreasing with time on the scale of the edge of the universe, was proposed by Alan Woodruff. So again, now he's slowing light down in an ether, which doesn't make any sense. In a cosmological extension, the model was extended to predict a decelerating expansion of the universe. And yet, what other things did it predict? Probably it predicted all the frogs on Earth would die Thursday at 7 p.m. And that's not going to happen. So it predicts lots of shit that doesn't happen. So there's no point in saying I solved one problem when you've made 16 other problems. That's inefficient physics. Let's see, do we need all this crap? Well, anyway, Einstein sometimes used the word ether for a gravitational field within general relativity, but this terminology never gained widespread support. So again, Einstein seemed to think ether was the way to go. And yet he's claimed to be this horrible atomist. I mean, which one is the truth? We may say that according to the general theory of, so they're doing the same thing with physical quantities. In a sense, therefore, there exists an ether. So that's Einstein. Alright, so we already did this. There would be no propagation of light. So his argument, you need ether for light to get from one place to another. And clearly it can't be a moving ether, so therefore it can't be doing pressure, it can't be doing gravity if it's propagating light. So those two things are completely incompatible. Alright, quantum mechanics can be used to describe space-time as being non-empty at extremely small scales. Alright, so somehow there's water in the bottle, if you really, really look hard, but you're allowed to say there's no water in the bottle, right? So there's water drops in the bottle, but there's no water in the bottle. those two things are somehow compatible statements. No, that's just silly. Okay, fluctuating and generating particle pairs. So again, this whole notion that we need to find something in the nothing, and this goes back to various idiotic experiments, misinterpretations of experiments. Again, just simple stuff. This whatever it's called, Kashmir effect with charged plates, where they're assuming a different mechanism than the obvious mechanism, which is everything in the universe. When two atoms go near each other, they're going to automatically recognize that they have two ends that are repulsive and two ends that will attract, and they're automatically going to rotate and turn to maximize their non-compatibility. They want to be compatible with each other because they're moving towards each other. So they don't want to go ass to mouth. They want to go ass to ass, or mouth to mouth, that kind of thing. All right. Fluctuating particle pair. Sorry for that reference. That appear what the brain does. I don't know. That appear and disappear incredibly quickly. So again, this nonsense that things exist and then they don't exist, and all this is just so poofy on its face. I don't know why you people fall for this crap. I don't know why you say you don't require these people to show you any of this crap having any credibility. It's all made out of just tiny bits of evidence. Again, the whole expansion of space is really just based on two things: the existence of cosmic background radiation, which doesn't make any sense, right? If there was an explosion and we saw the radiation from the explosion, like the nuclear bomb, they're basically saying that the nuclear bomb goes off here, the radiation spreads out and then bounces back, so you can see it from every direction. So no matter where you look, it looks like the bomb went off there. Does that make any sense? Absolutely makes no sense at all, right? So that's just crap. And then the other thing is the redshift. Is there other reason for expansion? And again, you can come up with a simple theory that no, there's junk in space and the light has to travel through the junk, and as it travels through the junk, it hits more junk heading for it than away from it. So it obviously, in the same direction it's going, it hits more junk going the opposite direction, and that junk is what's really shifting the light frequency. I mean, you can come up with simple, logical explanations. But once they've devoted themselves to, we must make space expand, then they just keep forcing all the other data to fit that wrong axiom. They keep trying to, look, they said a cat was a dog, and now they keep trying to find ways to make cats stay dogs, even though, well, the evidence is sort of indicating a cat's not a dog. All right. Appear and disappear incredibly quickly, whatever that means. It has been suggested by some that Paul Dirac was crazy, that this quantum vacuum may be equivalent to modern physics of a particulate ether. However, Dirac's ether hypothesis was motivated by his dissatisfaction with quantum electrodynamics. The only part of quantum theory that makes any sense at all is quantum electrodynamics, and he didn't like it. That's the logical thing, where, Feynman diagrams. And it was never gained support from the mainstream scientific community. So at least there's something that crazy Paul Dirac said, that scientists said, well, that's too crazy. All right. Nobel laureate in physics, endowed chair in physics, Stanford University, had this to say. So this is the Laughlin guy, about ether in contemporary theoretical physics. It is ironic that Einstein's most creative work, the general theory of relativity, should boil down to a conceptualizing space as a medium, when his original premise in special relativity was that no such medium existed. Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing, right? So the first theory's 10 years before the other theory. One is just about the special case of acceleration, and this idea that all accelerations are the same, which forces you to make photons bend by gravity. Ironically, by a silly reason, the elevator in space analogy. Anyway, the word ether has extremely negative connotations in theoretical physics. Well, it just should have negative connotations because it's it's associated also with, God's paint palette because of its past association with opposition to relativity. So even that's kind of funny. Bent space-time, somehow you're bending something that's not a structure of some kind. You're bending a non-structure. I mean, if you ever imagine bent space without imagining the space as having some sort of character you can bend, that's pretty hard to imagine how you did that. The geometry did it. The geometry made of nothing. Oh, okay. This is unfortunate because stripped of these connotations, it rather nicely captures the way most physicists actually think about the vacuum. So he's conceding most physicists do believe in this ether crap. They're not particle physicists at all. They believe in some goo and think everything's vibrating in goo. Alright, relativity actually says nothing about the existence or non-existence of matter pervading the universe. It's not about matter, so again, they can't make this distinction between force and matter. Photons are not matter, they are force. It's a different thing. Stuff moving the speed of light is not matter. Alright, only that any such matter, see, so this is the key word, this is the key problem. This is like saying matter, saying force and electrons and protons are both matter, the same thing, is like saying I'm a living thing and one individual neuron in my brain is a living thing, and saying they're the same thing because they're both living things when they have nothing in common. I mean, they have as little in common as a brick to the Empire State Building. They just don't have anything in common. Must have relativistic symmetry. It turns out that such matter exists, says you. That he's referring to dark matter, no doubt. About the time relativity was becoming accepted, studies of radioactivity began showing that the empty vacuum of space, like they could ever go to a place that's a true empty vacuum of space. I mean, the whole point is that there's got to be something called force in that space. That's what the gravity would be. So the gravity would still be in the space. And if you understand the gravity to be a particle, well then, a particle of energy, then obviously space isn't empty of everything. Had spectroscopic structure similar to that of ordinary quantum solids and fluids. So again, you can't even make these comparisons because we can't create such vacuums. So again, that's just more gibberish. We can't. We can't create experimentally on Earth a space-style vacuum. Subsequent studies with large particle accelerators have now led us to understand that space is more like a piece of window glass than ideal Newtonian emptiness. So again, Newton, they have quoted, okay, is basically saying, no, it's not empty, it's full of this ether crap. And they're saying Newtonian emptiness. So you can see, you see how sloppy this all is. They don't even understand what each other's theories were. They don't understand the history. And they just keep making all these statements that really don't have any depth to them. I mean, you know, it doesn't. They're using one theory to explain one experiment and another theory to explain the other. It's just like I demonstrated with the slit experiments. They just ignore the fact that the slit experiments must be looked at as a collection of experiments, single, double, multi-slit, and you must look at what the results are of each one of those experiments and recognize how there is huge dissimilarities. Alright, it is filled with stuff that is normally transparent. Well, not dissimilarities that we're observing. Clearly, in the multi-slit, it's creating images at the location, which gives you some indication to say, well, could it possibly be images in the single and the double slit? And if it's images, well, it can't be wave interference. I mean, these are giveaways. The evidence has to be looked at as a whole. You can't just sit there and make your deductions based on one experiment and say, I'm only going to use this one, and I'm going to ignore what all these others say. You can't use Huygens in the single slit and then Huygens in the double slit because it doesn't work. You end up with too many waves. Alright, transparent but can be made visible by hitting. It's significantly hard to knock out a part. So you can hit the ether hard and break it. So again, this goes back to experiments that indicate that there's some sort of innate noise in the universe that you just can't get rid of. And I would argue that's the innate noise of the electron. The electron has a disposition where it just has an odd number of bits of momentum. So it can never be in balance. in any direction, because you either make it 3 and 2, or you make it 2 and 3. You can never add up to 5 with two same numbers, that kind of thing. The modern concept of a vacuum of space, confirmed by everyday experiments. So again, we don't have everyday experiments that can confirm what the real vacuum state is. It is a relativistic ether, but we do not call it this because that is taboo. So this is just about not saying what you believe. All right, well, I guess I'll do this one. Isaac Newton suggests historical models. So I don't know if you read this. I read this before, but anyway. Suggests the existence of an ether in the third book, Optics. Thus, not the ethereal medium in passing out of water, glass, crystal, or other compact and dense bodies in empty space grow denser and denser by degrees. No. And by this means refract the rays of light not in a point, but by bending them gradually in curved lines. So again, that's arguing again that the lens has density, or the water has density. And he's saying it's the absence of the ether in those substances that are causing the curved lines. Is it not this medium much rarer, okay, within the dense bodies of the sun, the stars, the planets, the comets, than the empty celestial space between them? So now he's making the argument for gravity. So there's the ether is thick in empty space. The emptier the space, the more thick the ether gets. And in passing from them to great distance, doth it not grow denser and denser permanently, and thereby cause the gravity of those great bodies towards one another? So he did give a theory of gravity, and stated it kind of obviously that he thinks there's a compressible fluid, would be the way to say it, in the universe, and that matter pushes on the compressible fluid, and pushing it to be denser, creating density in the fluid that forces things towards each other by creating pressure. And of their parts towards the bodies, every body endeavoring to go from the denser part of the medium towards the rarer part. Okay, so in a sense he's just saying that the objects displace the fluid and cause it to become more compressed, and create the pressure that will end up pushing things together. But it doesn't really explain how they push towards each other if they themselves are compressing the ether. So the problem with that theory is that the pressure is coming from the object displacing the ether, which means it's going out. And that outward pressure won't create gravity between two things, because they're both going to be pushing out ether. In the 19th century, the mooniferous ether, or ether, meaning light-bearing ether. So again, this is all about whether light needs something to propagate through, which I think is ridiculous, was a theorized medium for the propagation of light, electromagnetic radiation. However, a series of increasingly complex experiments had been carried out in the late 1800s, like the Michelson-Morley experiment, which again has no theoretical grounding in the sense that they still haven't explained where the light interference takes place in the experiment, in an attempt to detect the motion of the Earth through the ether, and had failed to do so. A range of proposed ether dragging theories could explain the null result, but these were more complex and tend to use arbitrary looking coefficients and physical assumptions. That is, they're just bullshit. Joseph Lamore discussed the ether in terms of a moving magnetic field caused by the acceleration of electrons. So again, this idea that accelerating electrons are creating a field, when no, they always have a field, and when you move the field, you're moving the field. So a moving field can hit you. A hammer that isn't moving can hurt you, right? It's the moving hammer that hits you. You got to move the field for the field to have an effect. but the field isn't created by movement. Okay, James Clerk Maxwell said the ether in several parts of its treatise. An attempt has been made to explain electromagnetic phenomena by means of mechanical action transmitted from one body to another by means of a medium occupying the space between them. The undulatory theory of light also assumes the existence of a medium. I'm going to take a pause for a second here. Come on, pause. Alright, seems to be back and such. Fix this. Partially fixed. Anyway, okay, so let's do Maxwell again just for fun. So this is, anyway, in several parts of this treatise, an attempt has been made to explain electromagnetic phenomena by means of mechanical action transmitted from one body to another by means of a medium occupying the space between them. So he's basically trying to turn his lines of force, which were lines coming out of an object in straight lines, not the round lines, but the lines that were causing the round lines, the bent lines. So there's straight lines that cause the bent lines, and basically attempt to explain them by explaining them as pressure, in an ether. The undulatory theory of light also assumes the existence of a medium. Again, undulatory being a word used instead of a word like periodic, or something like that. So it's just a choice of words that force you to do something. There's no undulating theory of light. There's light has a frequency, and a frequency can be a periodic event or an undulating event, and it's their choice to make it undulating. There's no facts that say it's undulating. Also assumes the existence of a medium. We have now to show that the properties of the electromagnetic medium are identical to those of the luminiferous medium. And again, there's no way to say they're identical, obviously. And I would argue that the electromagnetic medium is the luminescent medium in the sense that they're confusing the two things. Magnetism does not have anything to do with light. Light's not magnetic or electro. It's neither one of those things. But anyway, all right. Hendrik Lorentz and George Francis Fitzgerald offered within the framework of Lorentz's ether theory a more elegant solution to how the motion of an absolute ether could be undetectable length contraction. But if their equations were correct, Albert Einstein's 1905 special theory of relativity could generate some mathematics without referring to an ether at all. This led to physicists to conclude that this early modern notion of a luminescent ether was not a useful concept. Einstein, however, stated that this consideration was too radical and too anticipatory, and that his theory of relativity still needed the presence of a medium with certain properties. So it just never ends, the inability to come up with. Oh, here I'll do this is the Sage one again. From the 16th until the 19th century, gravitational phenomena has also been modeled utilizing an ether. So this is amazing that they're calling Lesage theory ether theory. This, to me, is an amazing bullshit. I mean, ultra-mundane particle is now ether. The most well-known formulation is Lesage theory of gravitation, although other models were proposed by Isaac Newton, Bernhard, somebody else, and Lord Kelvin. None of these concepts are considered to be viable by the scientific community today. Yeah, well, none of them have been inspected with any kind of thoroughness or with any kind of objective fairness. They want to discount them, they want to dispose of them, and so they do. But they do it with trivial arguments like Feynman's. You get hit by more rain in the front than the back when you run in the rain. I mean, it's just a trivial remark that doesn't get to the actual function of the physics. Comparing photons to raindrops is just bullshit. Alright. So anyway, yes, it was worth reading this crap, just because it just demonstrates how they all were nuts. Okay, in the sense they all were just desperately trying to make something fit. And it's all square pegs in round holes, or round pegs in square holes. They have a wrong premise, a misunderstanding of the difference between matter and force, an inability to understand, even though it was right in front of them from Maxwell. I mean, basically pointing out how magnetism moves the same speed as light. Light is a force, like magnetism. It imposes momentum, and it propagates at the same speed. That these things are the same thing, and they're just different formulations. One has a frequency and one doesn't. Not complicated. Alright, so till the next time, and such, and so forth, and whatnot. Yeah, that's more than enough, again.